Hello and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, can you hear me?
I can.
How are you doing today?
I always love it when we can actually hear things.
Yeah.
When we start the show and it actually works. I like that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. How you doing, Lou?
I'm doing very well. What are we going to meet? Mid-40s today? We're going to hit mid-40s?
Oh, I think we might even go higher than that. I think we might be in the low 50s. We might even be in the low 50s right now, and it feels warmer than that. It feels like you just, I mean, there's snow. I can see that there's snow outside my window, but I still feel like just running around. The weather's, the reason why I'm coming in from home today is my kids went to the zoo, and I have the place to myself, and it's quiet, and I never had that. So I have this opportunity that I have to luxuriate in this silence.
Yep. Sit in your nest and just enjoy the moment.
Enjoy the moment. Although it does make me a little bit sad because they're at the zoo and I've seen pictures and they look like they're having, the time of their lives.
It's a double-edged sword, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I will enjoy vicariously. My guest today is Mike Cross. He's a professor of chemistry at Northern Essex Community College and more, and we'll get into that. And he's also a chocolate expert. So, this is always one of my favorite. I love talking about food. I love talking about science. I'm very, very excited to be talking to Mike today. Mike, you're still on mute, I think.
Yep.
But you can hear me,
How's
right?
How's it going, Doug? Yeah.
Everything's going great. I'm happy to be here, and and I love this topic. And it's like the sort of thing where I have to restrain myself. I'm like kind of thinking of topics, and I have to say, no, I can't. We only have so much time. I emailed you and I asked you, can I ask about tea and coffee, because I'm kind of a tea and coffee nerd, and it didn't seem like your area of expertise. Although I'm sure there's some things that relate, like caffeine, and we'll talk about caffeine. So I Googled chocolate and I wanted to see, and if you Google tea, like if you Google green tea, it's all like the latest health. It's all like the latest, like, oh, it does this for cancer and blah, blah, blah. Coffee is kind of the same thing. It's always health related. It's mostly health related. And every once in a while, there's some sort of ethical issue or, about like the way farmers are being treated. With chocolate, it was all recipes. There was very little health related, even though I know there's this component here. That's what I was looking for. I wanted to see
hang on, guys. Hang on. I'm going to have to start the show again. It was set to go at 12:30 p.m., not a.m., so I'm going to start it in a second. Give me a second.
Oh, okay. My big lead-in.
Yeah,
all right.
Big lead-in. I'm so sorry.
It won't be as good.
No, you'll do fine. All right, hang on. I'm sorry about this. Hang on. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're back, guys.
Okay. Are we live right now?
Yeah, we're live right now.
Okay. All right. It's we'll roll with it. Okay.
Yep.
So before the break, I was talking about Googling coffee, where you always get health-related sort of stuff. Googling tea, you get health-related stuff. And then chocolate, which has this health component. Like even people who do like the paleo diet, you took this paleo diet where everything has to be like meat or like vegetables. It has to run in the woods or grow in the woods. They eat chocolate too. Like, it seems like chocolate gets this kind of pass, and I want to talk about why. But when I Googled chocolate, it was all recipes. It was all recipes and maybe a little bit about like cocktails. Except I got down to the end of the list on Google from earlier this week. There's a paper out in Rhode Island called the Valley Breeze. And they did a story on a woman named Eleanor Bucko, who just turned 100. Her birthday was last week. Eleanor, if you're listening, happy birthday. She just turned 100, and they asked her the secret to longevity. Her mom died when she was 85, so she knows something. And the one-word answer, of course, chocolate. Right? Something about chocolate, and she swears by it for longevity. What is it about chocolate that has this? What do you think, if you had to guess, what's going on in terms of the science of chocolate, where people could say something like that and have it be like, yeah, maybe there's something to it?
Yeah. I mean, my PhD advisor, she swore by kind of the same thing. She said, dark chocolate, green tea, and red wine, you'll live forever. So that was her philosophy. I don't know if I believe everything, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but I think the main component would be the flavonols. So there's these very powerful form of antioxidants that are found in chocolate, as well as in, other darkly colored fruits like blackberries and black plums and so forth. And those are really good at destroying free radicals, these little chemical terrorists that get into the cells and cause all kinds of damage. So by flooding our cells with these flavonols, these antioxidants, we can prevent a lot of that DNA damage, which may lead to these ideas of longevity.
What do we know about the health benefits? What do we know? What we're pretty sure of? What does chocolate do for us that's good?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because we all have a love affair with chocolate. We want some rationale for why it's not so bad, right? And so I think first, those flavonols, those antioxidants, because not only do those help to prevent DNA damage, but they've also been shown to lower cholesterol levels, stimulate nitric oxide production, which helps to increase blood flow. They found that the cocoa itself may actually help to fight insulin resistance, the preliminary stages of diabetes. They found that chocolate, because it improves blood flow, they found that students who eat chocolate before exams actually do better on those exams. Mostly because, you're getting increased blood flow to the brain, which helps to improve recall. They've found that eating chocolate regularly actually offers some natural sun protection. So it's a nice day outside, just go out to the beach, right? A little Hershey syrup no, not the Hershey syrup part, but just the idea that people who regularly consume chocolate actually sunburn more slowly than those who don't. Again, most likely because those flavonols, those antioxidants are getting into the cells, preventing some of that sun damage. They found that chocolate also it increases serotonin production, which acts as a natural antidepressant. And it has, pretty good host of essential minerals, copper, iron, potassium, magnesium. So pretty good for a humble bar of chocolate.
Yeah. Do we have a sense of the effective dose? Like because obviously if you eat too much, we all know what the problem's going to be.
Exactly.
What's the ideal, what's a fair ideal amount to consume?
Yeah, the sweet spot, if you'll pardon the pun. Yeah, I would say, so there are some studies, like there's an Italian study in 2005 looking at cholesterol, where they were feeding participants, I think 100 grams a day. Now that's a full Lindt bar. That's a pretty decent amount of chocolate. But for most of the studies, they find that the best amount is probably about 30 grams. So you're talking about 5 Hershey Kisses, about 2 or 3 of the little Dove chocolates, or about 2 big squares of Lindt chocolate. So it's a pretty decent amount.
Do you have a favorite?
I'm a big Lindt fan. I love Lindt. I'd go
and you keep yourself to 30 grams at a time, or does it ever somehow stray magically upwards from 30
Yeah,
grams?
I'd usually go up to the factory outlet up in Stratham, and I'd pick up, a whole ton of chocolate, hide it in the closet, and then after the kids are in bed, I'd break out a few squares for me, a few for my wife, maybe a few more for therapeutic purposes if it's been a rough day.
Sure.
I try to limit it to about that much, but I can't honestly say that I always succeed.
Speaking of therapeutic purposes, we published an article on you. And for those of you who are just joining us live, my guest is Mike Cross. He's a professor of chemistry at Northern Essex Community College, and among other things, a chocolate expert. You mentioned in this is up on the website if anybody wants to go to mvmag.net and look for chocolate or look for Mike Cross, you'll find it, that chocolate seems to work on some of the same receptors in the brain, if I'm getting this right, as THC.
Uh-huh.
Can I get a buzz if I eat enough chocolate?
Good question. So the answer is yes, but you probably have to eat about 20 pounds of chocolate in one sitting. Okay. Which, that's a pretty decent amount of chocolate. But the idea is that there's a natural neurotransmitter in your brain called anandamide. It comes from the Sanskrit word for bliss, right? Which gives you a good reason why they named it that. It's responsible for runner's high. So I've never experienced this personally, but apparently when you're exercising, it's supposed to feel good at some point. So that's what they say. And that's
lies. They just tell you that. They just tell you that just to trick you.
Yeah. So you're running that marathon and your brain starts to produce anandamide, makes you feel good. And it trips this receptor, which then, you feel kind of a euphoric feeling, you keep running. So chocolate does contain some of that same chemical, anandamide. But that same receptor can get overexcited by THC, right, in marijuana. And so it's the same receptor, different chemicals.
Okay. I wanted to ask about theobromides. And even just like, like the word history, it's pretty interesting. What's going on there? Is there something magical going on? Like it's such a weighted, word. It's like magic. Now you're dealing with like true superfoods when it has theobromides. Yeah. What's a theobromide? What's it doing on chocolate? What does it do to our brains?
Yeah, good question. So it comes from the name of the cocoa tree, or Theobroma cacao, which literally translates to food of the gods. So someone definitely knew what they were talking about when they named it. So this theobromine, it's the chemical cousin of caffeine. So it looks very, very similar to caffeine, just a few atoms difference. But in chemistry, especially biochemistry, a few atoms can make a huge difference. So we've all experienced what happens with caffeine, where your energy level spikes and then it crashes. So theobromine and some of its, counterparts, they will cause like a low level kind of buzz, a low level kind of excitement of the neural, like the neurons. It'll trigger those, but to a much lesser extent, right? Not to the same level as caffeine. Which is why a lot of people could have, some chocolate before bed, but couldn't eat or couldn't drink a cup of coffee before bed, right? So they do exist in chocolate. A lot of people will say that chocolate contains a lot of caffeine. It's actually not true. If you separate out theobromine from caffeine, they found that, a big Lindt bar, for instance, will have less caffeine than a cup of decaf coffee, but it'll have very high levels of theobromine. And one of the things about that theobromine is that it's actually a natural cough suppressant. So some of those all natural cough drops that you could buy, the active ingredient is theobromine. You could literally just suck on a square of dark chocolate and get the same effect. I personally think it tastes better too.
Yeah. What about the like powdered cacao? Does that have the same effect is that a good idea instead of eating hot chocolate, instead of like dark chocolate? Is that good, or is that just kind of like a scam? Or
yeah, it's probably a little of both. All of the health benefits from chocolate, such as they are, come from the actual cocoa itself, right? Cocoa or the cacao powder. So by eating that or drinking that or using that, you're getting all the health benefits without any of the extra calories and sugar and some of the nasty stuff that chocolate has in it. So if you're going for maximum health benefits, then yeah, I would go for something like the cacao powder, cocoa nibs, same type of thing, right? They break open the little cocoa pods and then pull out the cocoa beans and you get the nibs. So they're good. Is it worth it for the price? I would probably say no, right? I would probably say that, just getting something like cocoa powder from the grocery store that you would use to make hot chocolate or use to make, cake gives you almost all the same benefits at a fraction of the price.
Interesting. All right, that's good. I can save a couple bucks because I do go to Whole Foods and occasionally get the cacao powder.
Right.
So plants do this weird thing, and this gets into a little bit caffeine. I don't know as much about it with chocolate, which is they have these chemicals to prevent them from getting attacked.
Right.
Because unlike a cow, they can't walk away. Unlike a wolf, they can't bite you back, right? So they have to do something so that people just aren't constantly feasting on them. They either have to taste bad, whatever. Something has to go on. And then humans and other creatures, sort of hack these things, right? Like with caffeine, which is supposed to keep insects away. But It turns out we can kind of do certain things to it so we can process it and it makes us feel happy. Are there things like that going on with chocolate that are there to deter pests and deter people from paying attention to the chocolate that we then go and manipulate for our own purposes?
Yeah. It turns out that theobromine, this low levels of caffeine, really their purpose is, insecticide, right? It's to keep things away. We as humans are weird because we seek after those things that taste bitter, that, taste weird, that normal, quote unquote, normal animals wouldn't mess with. We do the same thing with tobacco, right? Nicotine is an insecticide. It will purposely kill off anything that tries to eat it. And we as humans smoke or chew it, the tobacco, in order to get to that nicotine. So it's funny because with coffee, with chocolate, we enjoy the bitter flavor of it, whereas we are hacking it. The coffee beans, the cocoa beans, they're thinking, oh, this is great. Nothing's going to eat me now. And we're like, all right, that's why I'm going to eat you.
Yeah, yeah, and this reminds me of capsaicin. It reminds me of hot peppers.
Yeah.
You know, we'll get into a little bit of the history of chocolate here, but that's something that like clearly is meant to be like you're supposed to eat that hot pepper and say, no way, that's painful. I don't.
Yep.
And then it's like the next day, like, you know, maybe I got a little bit more of that. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, early chocolate was they were spicing it, right? Like in Mesoamerica,
Right.
from the early days, and maybe you can tell us a little bit like when did people start drinking this, and why on earth were they putting chili in it, you know, hundreds of years ago?
Yeah, exactly. So the Olmec and the Mackaya, they're the earliest people that we have recorded using chocolate, right? In about 1900 BC. And so they were, you know, it's a little different than what we were using. I mean, even the word cocoa comes from the Olmec word cacao, which, you know, was their name for chocolate. So they were using this, but they were brewing it as a drink. So they would brew it cold for one thing, and then they didn't have sugar. And so instead they would spice it with things like allspice. They would put in chili powder, give it a little extra kick, I guess. So imagine, you know, hot cocoa that, you know, was cold and tastes like a jalapeno. And that's really what you had back then. They, you know, later on, the Maya came along around 8300. They also loved chocolate. They were the first people that we have recorded as using cocoa beans as currency. So they actually, anthropologists have even found like exchange rates, basically. For about 3 cocoa beans, you could get an avocado. For about 200, you could get a turkey. So they were using this as money. They also would use it in their marriage rituals. So the lucky bride and groom would drink from the same cup of cocoa. They would exchange cocoa pods, you know, like this is a dried up one. So they exchange these as a symbol of life and fertility, which is kind of a nice little ritual. And then the Aztecs in around the year 1200, they came in, conquered a bunch of people, and as tribute, as taxes, they would demand cocoa beans. So they were using it as well. They also were interesting because they would actually press out the cocoa butter and they would use it as a skin cream to protect their skin, which is funny because what goes around comes around, right? You know, nowadays, all the fancy skin creams are enriched with cocoa butter. So that's what they were using. It wasn't until the Spaniards, you know, Columbus, Cortez, and others came in and quote unquote discovered the New World and then took this cocoa with them back to Spain, and they gave it to the king and queen, and they weren't really impressed. They thought, why would anyone drink this stuff? It's bitter, it's spicy. You know, why drink it? Until someone had the brilliant realization that we could leave out the chili powder, we could add vanilla and sugar, and lo and behold, everyone wanted it. Swept Europe at that point.
It may be coming back. There's a hot chocolate place. I don't know if it's open during the pandemic. I don't know how they're faring, but out in Salem, Mass, they have like this kind of craft artisanal chocolate lab place where you can get like very nice high-end, you know, hot chocolate where you can see exactly where they sourced all the ingredients. And they had like a kind of Mayan version of this that had that was spicy. And they warned me not to order it. They told me specifically, be careful, like this is legitimately like very, very hot. And it's like, no, I had to go there. I had to have that one.
Yeah, exactly.
It was very spicy. Is there a religious component to the pre-contact history?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know of any like religious connotations besides the fertility aspect of it. You know, they believed that it also had aphrodisiac properties, which is something that kind of carries through even today. But I'm not sure if they used it in any actual like religious ceremonies. That'd be interesting to look into.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be that any drink that humans like to consume that in some ways alters the chemistry of your brain, there's a religious component. Like if you go to China and you look up in the mountains and if you see a tea farm, there's going to be a monastery nearby because the monks drink tea to stay alert. Coffee early on was used as a way to keep people awake during prayer. Wine, obviously, is used for sacramental purposes. And you just, you know, you have to, it just seems to be like across the boards, whenever humans drink these things that somehow do something to our brains and ignite, fire some synapses, there's also this religious component. So I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So let's get into you a little bit because
Sure.
we haven't really like introduced you. You're not right now. You're teaching at Northern Essex Community College part-time. You're a very well-liked professor. You were there for a long time, but you're only there part-time right now. Why is that?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Utah. I grew up here, attended the University of Utah for my doctorate, and then moved out to New England, right? We're living in New Hampshire, teaching at Northern Essex, which I love. Wonderful place to teach and to work. And then last summer, I got a job offer to come back to Utah to teach at Snow College, which is in a rural town in Ephraim, Utah. And we decided that it was time to do it. So moved back here. So yeah, I get the wonderful opportunity to teach here, and then also to continue to teach at Northern Essex.
How are rural students different than the students you would have at NECCO?
Yeah, let's see.
Other than, and by the way, this is kind of fascinating. We were talking about this before the show.
Uh-huh.
You were referring to this area as where COVID goes to die because it's so rural that it's affected you a lot less. You kind of moved at the right time as far as maintaining a kind of normal life. But other differences aside from just the open space surrounding them in the students, are they interested in different things? Do they respond to things in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's more outdoor interests. Everyone here loves to hunt and hike and fish and, drive around their ATVs. My wife actually loved it because we came into town and she first sees people just driving around on their four-wheelers down Main Street. And, it's a normal thing. Student-wise, I would say that the biggest difference, honestly, is probably the rural students aren't as afraid to ask for help, which I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's just a cultural thing, but like I utilize my office hours here far more than I ever did, back east. I don't know if there's a New England, pride thing where it's I'm all set, right? I'm self-sufficient. I can handle this on my own. Or if students are just busier out there, my students here, they're more traditional, right? I don't have nearly as many non-traditional students. If they work, they typically work part-time or maybe full-time, whereas many of my Northern Essex students work, 3 or 4 jobs and have kids. And so maybe that's part of the reason why they're not as able to ask for help, is because they simply don't have the time to come in and spend some time in office hours.
Did this role of teaching at community colleges, did this happen to you, or did you decide that this was the path? In other words, was there this sort of like day where it's like, I could become a research scientist, I could do this, I could go work for Dow Chemical, or even within the academic field, I can do these kind of things. But man, it's really teaching. That's the thing I want to do. Or was it more like, here's the opening, here's the door, walk through? What happened?
Right. Yeah. So I guess zoom back to about 15 years ago. I was finishing up my doctorate in organic chemistry, and kind of that final year, I was doing research, and my whole goal was to become a pharmaceutical, researcher, pharmaceutical chemist, and work for someplace like Pfizer, and mostly because I really enjoyed the lab work. I enjoyed the science. And then that summer, a friend of a friend wanted to take a summer off. He was teaching at College of Eastern Utah, and he wanted to take time off. He needed someone to cover his class for the summer. And I thought, well, I might as well try it, get away from research just for a summer, kind of take a break. Then I can, get back in there fresh and finish up my doctorate. And so we did that. And I think it was probably the first or the second day after teaching, I came home and I told my wife, this is what I want to do. I love this. I love being in the classroom. I get to talk about the chemistry that I love so much, and I get to explain that to students. It's fabulous. And she panicked because, as we all know, educators don't make a lot of money. And so very different life plan than being a pharmaceutical chemist. But I've never regretted it. I've always loved it.
Do you think you might have like an inner performer or something? I mean, you're known for using games and magic tricks in your classrooms. And this is, maybe a little bit unusual in the sciences, right? Where you kind of consider the classic scientists as being sort of introverted, but you
Right.
seem to like to talk. You give talks, and you have been part of the speakers bureau at NECCO for a long time. So do you have like a performer down there ready to come out, and the classroom gives you that opportunity?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny question because I'm definitely introverted. Like I would much rather go home and read a good book than go to a party. I hate small talk of I think that the definition of hell is going to a barber shop forever and being expected to like try to come up with something to say for all
Yeah.
eternity. Like that is torture to me. But I love teaching, and I do love speaking, and I'm not sure exactly why. I think it has something to do with when I can talk about something I'm passionate about, that it's like I'm able to kind of set aside introvert Mike and instead bring out like, hey, this is cool stuff, you guys. Like, don't you understand how amazing this is? And I don't know, it's almost like acting. It's almost like putting on a role of someone else, and it's kind of a nice escape. And then as soon as I'm done in the classroom, I get to go back home and be an introvert again.
Yeah, yeah. So you're getting students at the end of their like K through 12 journey. And
Right.
and I wonder if because you're in that position, are you seeing like, man, the kids are just not getting this type of science literacy. They're not getting this. I wish they could get more of this, and it would be better. Are you seeing that? Is there something that the K through 12 could be doing with science literacy that they're not doing?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, obviously it depends on the students. I get some students who are, amazing. They come through, K through 12, and they show up, and I think, wow, you should be in grad school. Like that's how top notch you are. Their work ethic's amazing. They go through, they go through all these obstacles in order to get their education, and they do a phenomenal job. But the one thing I guess that consistently I see is, just some science literacy, I guess critical thinking. So many people nowadays, my students included, they think, oh, if I Googled something, then it must be true, right? They don't stop to think like, oh, is there a ulterior motive behind this? Or, here's one obscure person who claims this, but what about the vast majority of scientists, right? And it goes to anything, right? Something like climate change, GMOs, let's see, vaccines, all these different topics where there's a scientific consensus on each and every one of them. And yet students think that, oh, well, if someone, thinks GMOs are great, they're in their pocket of Monsanto, right? Instead of saying, well, actually, like every major health organization in the world literally says these are okay. But no, it doesn't fit with my personal or political beliefs. Therefore, it can't be true. And that to me is tough. That I think we should look at it and say, you know what? What's the scientific consensus? And go with that. I mean, I'm not a mechanic. And if I have a problem with my car, I don't just, I might Google it, but I'm going to trust my mechanic and the consensus of what mechanics say rather than just going with my gut instinct.
Are you finding students who believe in like the truly bizarre? And I've talked to science teachers who, not college level, but younger, who for a time, I assume this is kind of faded, really were having students come in who believed flat Earth theory. Are you getting anything that's just like really so out there that's like, well, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah. I once had a research paper from a student that was about how vaccines were government eugenics, which I thought was pretty interesting. Didn't have anything to do with chemistry, so I'm not sure why he turned it into me. But yeah, so I get some of that. When I do a lot of, like I give a talk on old wives' tales and how we can scientifically debunk, a lot of old wives' tales, but some of them are true, right? But we have to test them. And that conversation I always ask, well, what are some things that you've heard? I've heard everything from, if you have sex, then you should take a shower because that way you can't get an STD, right? So just some pretty basic biological things or scientific things where just a little bit of research would tell you that's not true, but they heard it somewhere, so it must be true.
Yeah. In 2016, the Chronicle of Higher Education wrote something about you. about the time you went undercover as an undergraduate. I went to look at the article, and it's behind a paywall, so I cannot read it. So what was in that article? What happened? Why did you go undercover?
Yeah. This was a few years back. I just gotten tenure at Northern Essex, loving it there. But I was actually at at our honors ceremony where, right before graduation, we have all these honor students come up and we clap for them, and it's great. And I was wondering, as I'm clapping for my students and thinking, oh, I remember her from my intro chemistry class. She was great. And I was thinking about all the students that weren't there, right? That were phenomenal students that didn't have any, there was no academic reason why they shouldn't have been there, but they just kind of disappeared, mid-semester, they're gone, and I can reach out and nothing. And so I decided to actually kind of see what it was like, because it had been a while since I'd been in school and things obviously changed. So the next day I actually went to the advising center and said that I wanted to enroll as an undergraduate at Northern Essex. It took a while for them to believe me. They thought I was, just pulling their leg. But I said, no, here's my transcript, bring it in. And I just wanted to see what life was like for my students. And so for, a full year, I went to classes, I went to advising, I took the AccuPlacer exam that you have to take to get in, just to see what it was like, see what life was like for my students. And it was really eye-opening for me.
What did you find?
I found that students are pretty amazing, that they deal with, especially non-traditional students, since I was a traditional, fresh out of high school, go to the local university, kept a part-time job, no kids, no family, versus my students and me when I went back to have a full-time job, a family, other responsibilities, kids, it was challenging. They go through a lot. I found that there were some really amazing things that Northern Essex, is doing for their students to help, guide them through some of these hurdles to make it easier for them. And I also found that there are some things that we as faculty members don't always do, right? I mean, I remember we use Blackboard as kind of our learning management system. And I'd have students complain that they couldn't log into Blackboard, or that Blackboard changed their quiz answers and things like that. And I try to believe them, but a lot of times I think, oh yeah, whatever. Until I took these classes and ran into the exact same issues and thought, wow, my students have been telling me the truth. And I found that the vast majority of students are honest. In fact, they don't tell you nearly as much as what's actually going on in their lives. I'd have a classmate who didn't know that I was a professor tell me that, oh, I'm not going to be in class the rest of the week. I have to take my mom to chemo. And I say, oh, did you talk to the professor? No, they don't want to hear it. And it broke my heart to think that people are suffering and we as faculty members don't know. And we have to build that relationship. We have to let them know that, hey, I'm going to trust you as a student until you show me otherwise, right? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. But it was nice. It was nice to be able to go through my whole associate's degree, graduate alongside with some of my students, and to say, you know what, I now understand a little bit more what you're going through.
We could probably do the whole podcast on this one thing. This is pretty fascinating. I have two questions.
Sure.
One is goofy and one is maybe semi-goofy. I have to actually have two things to ask you. I'm looking behind you, and of your right shoulder, there seem to be some bottles in the bookcase up there. Is life that stressful down there in Utah? What am I looking at?
Yeah.
That's Sambuca?
I'll grab one and show it to you real quick. So I'm really into old bottles. I do a whole talk on medical quackery. I think it's fascinating. But so on top of liking old bottles, I also grew up with my dad's ship in a bottle on his shelf. And so I thought, oh, I should do that sometime. So I decided to start making what are called impossible bottles. So this is a deck of cards with all the cards in it inside of, this bottle.
That's not science. That's just pure magic, right? You have to do some incantation and then it shows up in the bottle, right?
Yeah, lots of patience.
Over your other shoulder, I see what appears to be some type of cage, maybe for an animal. Is there a living thing in that box I'm looking at?
Yeah, so that.
So you have the cool office, right? You have the office people like to hang out with because it's all.
My wife says that I I collect hobbies. My hobby is to collect hobbies. So I saw this amazing artist in Maine who makes almost like steampunked insects and crabs and so forth. And so I decided to make a version of it myself because I couldn't afford to purchase his amazing work. So I kind of made my own knockoff. So apologies to him. But so this is my little steampunk crab right here, where I put in some different pieces of clockwork and so forth. I've got some insects that I did the same thing, but my wife refuses to let me keep those at home because they creep her out. So they're in my office.
So now I lied. I lied because I have two questions left before I turn it over to Lou. So the first one is, what were you reading when you grew up? Were you reading a lot of science fiction? Is there an imaginative part of this path?
Yeah, science fiction, fantasy. I was really big into fantasy. The idea of magic and so forth. I've always loved. Lord of the Rings was my go-to thing.
It's amazing to me how many people get into the sciences through the arts, and even things like Star Trek. How many people became scientists because of Star Trek?
Yep, exactly.
It's pretty cool. All right. So the other thing is your Genius grant comes in out of the blue, not expected, and you have a year to work on anything you want. It can be a book. It can be a research project. You got 1 year. What's it going to be?
Wow.
No pressure.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no pressure. I don't know. Well, just about a year ago, I published my first children's book called Francesca and the Genie of Science, which I love doing, and I thought that was fun. One of my former students.
Can people get that on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah, so just Google Mike Cross and Francesca and the Genie of Science. It's a goofy little kid's book. One of my former students illustrated it, so it's kind of nice. So I love doing that, but I don't know if I'd write a book. I think I would probably, I don't know. I think I'd go back to trying to really dig into some things that I had learned when I went undercover as a student. So I think I'd really try to pull apart how to best help students, how to walk that line where you're helping them and strengthening them and helping them to meet the high expectations that they need for college, but not overburdening them with things that they don't need, right? I guess the idea of equity, trying to make them feel included while not sacrificing integrity, right? Because it's easy to cheat, it's easy to inflate grades, it's easy to do those things, but those don't help students, right? So I think I would try to look at what I could do to help my students the most.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to make sure Lou got in here. Lou, do you have any questions for our guest?
Yeah, Mike, let's go back to the chocolate thing for a second and start there. And my question is, because I've been somewhat aware of these benefits for a long time. In fact, I go to the grocery store and I buy, Hershey's has these little dark chocolate assortment things that I buy and just pop one in every once in a while when I feel I need a little lift. Is all dark chocolate the same? In other words, is my Hershey's okay, or do I need to upgrade the type of dark chocolate I'm buying? What should I avoid and what should I look for?
Yeah. So it's not so much about the price of it, right? So you don't have to go with Godiva chocolates or something expensive. But what I would recommend is just flip over the candy bar and check the label. So what you're looking for, one thing to look for is you specifically want high amounts of cocoa. So most chocolate bars will gladly tell you, oh, this is 72% Twilight Dark. They want you to know how much is in there. And the more cocoa, the better. Although in my philosophy, it needs to still taste good, right? Yeah. I can't go above about 80% for me. It's too bitter and chalky. Then also something to avoid is you don't want anything like partially hydrogenated vegetable oil. It means they've actually taken out some of the healthy fats that are found in chocolate. They've substituted it with cheap, vegetable oil instead. So in those cases, you're getting, a lot of the bad fats and none of the good ones.
And just to clarify for people, milk chocolate has little to none of these qualities.
It has some of the same benefits, but it's probably about 1/3 what you'd find in a good quality bar of dark chocolate. So that means if you're going to go for health benefits, go as dark as possible. Or as the wise woman once told me, just eat 3 times as much milk chocolate. And that way you'll get the same benefit, right?
There you go.
But I should mention that, my doctorate's in organic chemistry, not a medical doctor. My wife started telling people that her husband's a doctor, but not the kind that helps people. So take all medical advice with a grain of salt there.
At a different point in my life, I was actually delivering cars for people up and down the East Coast, which meant driving very long stretches. And one of my favorite things to do when I had to do that and do it quickly was get coffee beans covered in dark chocolate.
Oh, nice.
Because it would keep you going, but less rest stops. You know, it wasn't like drinking a bunch of coffee all the time. So that's a good trip if you get a long trip. Tell me what sparked your interest in chemistry from the beginning. We heard how you got into teaching. What sparks a young boy into saying, I'm pointing my life down the chemistry path?
Yeah, my dad majored in physics, right? He was an aerospace engineer until he got into computers. But so I always wanted to be a physicist. I remember in kindergarten, people are like, oh, I want to be a police officer. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a teacher. And I'd say, I want to be a physicist. And everyone would look at me funny. And I kept wanting to be a physicist until I got to high school. I took physics and loved it, but I also took chemistry and thought, wow, this is everything that's great about physics, but with explosions. And so that's really what turned me on to chemistry, was these amazing demos and understanding why things behave the way they do.
While you were talking, I love the discussion you and Doug had about teaching being theater, and then you talked about you didn't quite get there, but what you were talking about was having an alter ego in the classroom. And Doug is a publisher, has a voice through written word in the magazine, and me in radio, I have a voice that way. And we all have alter egos, but we love to go home and drop the alter egos. It's a big part of what we do. But when you were talking, I heard references to magic, and I heard references to genies, and I heard references to chemistry, obviously. And the word that came to mind for me was alchemy, which is an old ancient word, but alchemy was the magical side of chemistry, wasn't it? How much alchemy still exists today?
Yeah. So, alchemy really was the beginning of chemistry. And it was really these alchemists who were doing careful measurements that became the first chemists. And so really we owe a lot to it. I mean, even many of the names of our elements, things like mercury, refer to astrological things. So there still is some. What I think is really cool is that we're now able to do some of the things that alchemists always dreamed of using actual chemistry. So a few years back, someone actually took some, I believe it was bismuth, put it in a nuclear reactor, bombarded it, and turned it into gold. Yeah. And so you can literally create gold out of a base metal, which is what the alchemists always dreamed of. Turns out that it costs about 10,000 times more than just digging the gold up out of the ground, but at least we could do it, right?
To that end, from a chemistry standpoint, and Doug was talking about taking a grant, in the chemistry business, there are some things that are on the horizon that are, of course, science fiction still at this point. But what's the low-hanging fruit? What's the next big breakthrough in chemistry that we're so close to that if you could take a year, you might want to chase it down?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there. I think probably the area, personally, where chemistry is really taking off is biochemistry, right? Where we're looking at all these cool, amazing things, but we're looking at how those affect the human body. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really where things are growing the most, and where they can also probably have the most capacity to do good. So things like CRISPR technology, where, this is biology, but it's chemistry, right? It's kind of a mixture. And being able to look at someone who might have a genetic disorder, and instead of thinking, okay, how can we treat this? We can literally say, well, how can we just change it, right? How can we change it to something better? Yeah. But obviously then there's the slippery slope argument. There's a lot of, we still need ethics, obviously, nearly, just as much as we need the science. And so I think there needs to be this balance between those. But that, I think, is the biggest area for growth.
Yeah, the vaccine, this was probably old news in the chemistry industry, but I thought the vaccine solutions were fascinating in that it was a vaccine without actually infecting the patient. It was a modified RNA strand that taught the body what to do, as opposed to teaching it through experience. So, and you just mentioned the difference between ethics and where we are in a chemistry standpoint. Are we at that threshold where we have enough hacks for the body that we really have to start bringing ethics into this and deciding how far we should go, not how far we can go?
Yeah, I think we really are. I think that We have so much ability to do things, but we don't always use it properly. I mean, I think the new COVID vaccines are a good example of this, where, you know, if someone had told me a year ago that we could come up with a new vaccine in 8 months, there's no way I would have believed them. And yet here we are, right, where we have multiple vaccines. And I think it's because humanity as a whole said, here's a problem. This is a big enough deal that we need to fund it. We need to put in the effort, and we need to advance the science to meet what humanity needs. And I think it really goes to show what we could do if we just kind of buckled down and said, you know what, maybe we should look at poverty, at hunger, at, you know, all of these things that we have the capacity to change, but we just don't have the moral willpower, the ethical willpower to do it, right? We're too caught up in our own little worlds. And it's sad, but I think that's where we need to go. I think we have the tools. We just need the ethics to say, how do we use those tools to do the greatest amount of good?
Mike, do you have a social media presence? Can people follow you and see what you're up to on Twitter or Instagram or?
Let's see. So no, I don't do much in the way of Twitter, but I do have a YouTube channel. So, you know, but it's mostly just my chemistry videos for my students.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I feel like sometimes people want to go back and learn things like that they didn't have the opportunity. So maybe that's a good thing. So people can follow. Is it just under your name?
Yeah, so you can just search Mike Cross Chemistry NECC, and it should pull it up. I believe my username is Lothar Cross. Lothar was a famous chemist who never got any credit. Came off the periodic table. So yeah, Lothar Cross.
we touched on so many topics. I just hope you'll come on again someday.
Sure.
So that we can dig in on these, because it's like, just as we're talking, it's just so much is coming to me like, oh, I want to ask about this, but we're out of time. I feel like any food show, it always happens. I'm so like susceptible to influence. It's like the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my car and go get a chocolate. I do it every time. Every time we do a food show, I go out to the market afterwards.
I will admit I've got some chocolate in my cabinet because I knew that was going to happen, and so I have it waiting here in my office.
You're ready. You're ready. Well, if anyone's heading out to the markets around my house, don't buy all the chocolate, please. I don't want to have to drive all the way up to New Hampshire. Mike Cross, thank you so much for coming on the 495. I really, really appreciate it. Let's do it again sometime. And you know, I know you have a class to go teach. Thanks so much for spending time with us.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Lou.
All right, Mike, thank you.
All
right, Lou, I will see you next week.